Hi, I'm Michael Gourlay. This is a progress update on my game, Love Tanks, that I started in January 2021. I'll show what that game does in May 2021 and what it might become. This video will explain the basic concept and objective and my strategy for achieving that objective. Then I'll describe some specific mechanics, their current state, and ideas I might try. The concept behind Love Tanks is this. Tanks make friends and enemies by sending gifts and attacking each other to survive and thrive. Maybe think about it as Battlezone meets Pikmin meets Avatar. Sort of. My objective in making this game is to give players a feeling of companionship with non-human friends. Since I was a little kid who read in the 1970s about Eliza, I used to want to make a conversational companion, but I pivoted away from that and mostly abandoned that endeavor. Then, after overhearing Kelly Campaglia design Kindred, a VR experience about falling in love with a non-human character, and after appreciating the relationship I have with my cats, who do a lot of nonsense, and I love them for it, I realized that a non-verbal companionship is underappreciated. So in this game, I'll explore how to induce feeling companionship with machines, war machines, who take care of each other, and meanwhile, you control one of those machines. Wish me luck. In search of a way to achieving that objective, I studied wolves, military tank tactics, and love languages, hoping they would inspire me. Turns out they did, especially wolves. For an entire Sunday, I was so enamored with wild wolf behavior, I pondered taking up a new lifestyle, living with wolves, but that's a topic for another time. Anyway, it's not lost on me how absurd this concept is. Tanks, machines of destruction and war, falling in love with each other. Well, I plan to lean into that absurdity. By the way, the art so far is just placeholder. I plan to replace it with something adorable, so look past my programmer art in this video. I also want to keep the gameplay mechanics as simple as possible, yet with elaborate and chaotic consequences. So I will be on the lookout for emergence. Interesting behaviors that result organically from simpler behavioral rules I code explicitly. While I want to keep gameplay mechanics simple, the terrain could have variety, including how tanks locomote on different kinds of terrain. This shows how tanks drive on ordinary terrain, on water, and on ice. I hope players will discover things like this and be delighted by them. So while I want to keep the cognitive load on players low in terms of what actions they can take, I expect players will love complex terrain. So I might eventually exploit that freedom and imbue the terrain with loads of complexity. Also, I intend to deliberately reduce straight-line navigation in the hope that this could make the finite world feel larger than it is. Plus, everybody loves the poster, and that poster has trees, so I guess I need to add forests. In some sense, Love Tanks only adds a single new game mechanic to an extremely simple classic arcade game. Battlezone is an arcade game from Atari made in 1980. It features enemy tanks that attack the player, but those tanks ignore each other. Everybody drives on an unbounded terrain with a few simple obstacles. Love Tanks start with Battlezone, a rudimentary tank battle plus health, and each tank can regard each other as a friend, neutral, or enemy. Each tank has an affinity from -1 to 1 for each other tank. Tank behavior depends on affinity and health. This shows a tank picking up some health. Those round, colorful balls are pickups. When a tank contacts them, the tank health increases. Pretty basic stuff. But it gets more interesting. I'll explain in a moment. By the way, for now, those particle effects are just copy pasta from the projectile explosion. Ignore them. I plan to replace them with a treatment that telegraphs love or caring. Anyway, where do health pickups come from? Each tank can generate a health pickup as a gift and roll it toward another tank. A tank that receives a gift increases its affinity for the giver. By the way, gifts are one of the 5 love languages. This clip shows health affecting affinity. The AI diagnostic info here shows affinity changing as a tank receives gifts from another tank. I leave decoding the diagnostic info as an exercise for the viewer. Tanks can decide to give gifts based on a variety of conditions. For example, I have way more health than my friend, or my friend critically needs health. Even with this simple addition of gifting, some behaviors emerged, including playing catch, playing fetch, and luring distant tanks to come nearby. You can see some of that happening in this video clip. I take this emergent behavior as an encouraging sign that I might be onto something interesting. In addition to gifting, the love languages include quality time. A very loose interpretation of that turns out to serve a purpose in this game: breaking the ice, strangers becoming friends. This kickstarts tank relationships. When neutral tanks first encounter each other, they pause and face each other. They seem to be pondering, maybe that tank will attack me? If not, they grow to trust each other. Their affinity increases up to a limit, and they become friends. This familiarization breaks the ice between strangers and lets tanks graduate to acquaintances. Also, friends of friends can become familiar by the mutual proximity they have as they go on patrol with each other. Tanks that are friends will elect a direct leader, in other words, the pal that they follow. This is basically the nearest best friend. Of all friends within a region, elect the one with the highest affinity as the direct leader. Since affinity is, in general, not symmetric, it is possible to have a cycle of affinity. To break this cycle, the tank with highest global total affinity, that is the most popular, elects itself as its own direct leader. After breaking cycles and backtracking the following chains, the foremost direct leader is called the transitive leader or clan leader or alpha. The transitive followers of an alpha define a clan. When affinity of any tank A for tank C changes, positive or negative, nearby friends like B of A also change their affinity for C in proportion to A's change in affinity for C and B's affinity for A. Here are some examples. Scenario 1 shows tank C attacking tank A. It starts with tank B has an affinity of 0.5 for tank A. Then tank C shoots tank A. Tank A therefore lowers its affinity for tank C by, let's say, 0.2 because C shot A. Tank B, which has affinity 0.5 for tank A, lowers its affinity for tank C by 0.2 times 0.5, which is 0.1, because of its affinity for A. Let's look at scenario 2. Tank C sends a gift to Tank A. Tank B has affinity for Tank A. Tank C heals Tank A. And then Tank A raises its affinity for Tank C by 0.2 because C healed A. And then Tank B, which has affinity 0.5 for Tank A, raises its affinity for Tank C by 0.2 times 0.5, which is 0.1 via empathy for A. Remember that gifts grant health when they collide with a tank. If a pickup hits another pickup, it becomes an egg. And the health it would grant is in proportion to the number of pickups that made the egg. If an egg gets enough pickups to make a new tank, in other words, grant more than 100% health, then the egg becomes viable. This video shows that happening. The egg is viable when it sits upright. It then stops accepting additional pickups. Such eggs can spawn new tanks under the right conditions. The point of eggs is to hatch new tanks. Conditions for a new tank to spawn include when another tank dies. Well, actually, that's it for now. Maybe I will add more conditions later in the future. So I have some ideas for additional things that I might add. For example, right now, eggs are precious and helpless. You want eggs to be protected. For example, you might nestle them inside of a den, which I mean is, a land feature protected on 3 sides. But eggs could accidentally get consumed while bumbling tanks are maneuvering around. So you want to make it possible to push eggs into a den and avoid accidental consumption. So you could make tank-to-egg collisions not consume eggs. Instead, they would just roll around like boulders. But it should still be possible to consume eggs if that is the intention. In order to do that, an egg maybe would have to be cracked. The way you could crack an egg is to shoot it. This will make subsequent tank-to-egg contact with it consume the egg. And that would grant health to the tank that consumed it, like a regular pickup with extra potency. By the way, shooting an egg could also cause its egg parents to reduce the affinity for the shooter, basically acting like the parent itself was attacked. This would discourage human players from shooting eggs, especially of clan members, just to get easy health. Here's an idea about cub spawning. When cubs, and by cubs I mean just new tanks, spawn, they retain the affinity of their parents in proportion to their parents' contribution to the egg. For example, Tank A has affinity 0.5 for Tank B. Tank B contributes 80% of the health to an egg. Tank B dies. Tank B reincarnates into that egg. And then subsequently, Tank A has 0.5, its original affinity, times 0. Egg, the contribution percentage, which is equal to 0.4 of the affinity for the reincarnated Tank B. The benefits of contributing to eggs include that it's then less toil to recover from death. And you're also born into a clan with known relationships. The costs of doing this and the risks include that you have to spend health to make eggs. Also, another tank might spawn into an egg that you made. But note that such a cub might be born in neutral. If it is in a form of life, it contribute nothing to that egg. So cubs are an interesting kind of creature. Here's an idea about how cubs could mature. When tanks spawn and become a cub, they could have low health, for example, 20%. They would need gifts, in other words, health pickups, in order to become viable. There could be some possible phases here, including a newborn, which is lower than 20% health, and maybe those things could not move. And then maybe if they have 20 to 60% health, they could move but not do any damage. A cub would then become an adult when it reaches, let's just say, 60% health. Cubs can generate no pickups when they die, so there's no incentive for enemies to attack them. Also, cubs cannot harm other tanks. They could still maybe fire projectiles, but they would do no damage to tanks. It would be a form of play. Friends or enemies can adopt a cub by giving it gifts, thereby increasing their clan. This motivates a reason for a babysitter to remain near a den with an egg in it. Effectively, that establishes a territory. Maybe an interesting game mechanic. I don't know, we'll find out. It motivates a reason for a clan to return to the den, either to feed the babysitter or the cubs or both. My inspiration for this is that wolves actually treat cubs in exactly this way. Even so-called enemy packs treat cubs as special. They adopt them and take care of them. The rationale in this game for doing that is that it might engender a sense of companionship. We'll see. And visually, the way that I would identify cubs is maybe they could be drawn as smaller or more adorable to telegraph their special state. I also have this idea of possession, where if there are no eggs, when a human player tank dies, maybe it could spawn into a living tank, maybe the one that had the highest affinity for the now dead player tank. There are some benefits to that, including that rather than spawning into a stranger or enemy egg and clan, the player tank could respawn into a familiar clan. But there are some drawbacks, including that the total tank population could decrease, which makes for less drama. And also, the tank with the highest affinity for the player could still be an enemy tank, which is kind of weird. I'm not super in love with this possession idea, but I don't know. There was a moment there where I thought it was kind of cool. I also thought, well, clans really ought to be about the same size as each other, because that just makes it more dramatic. If a clan became too large, it could too easily dominate another clan, and likewise, if a clan became too small, it could too easily become eradicated. So to balance clan sizes, I could, for example, when an AI tank in the largest clan dies, that tank could hatch an egg in the smallest clan. Potentially, I could limit that reincarnation to just AI tanks, because player tanks would notice, and they might expect a return to an egg that they made. Another idea is when a clan gets too big to use disperser tanks, and that entails the following. Induce the affinity for that disperser tank to become neutral, meaning the tanks that previously befriended it treat it as neutral and vice versa. Then maybe put that tank into a special behavior, kind of like patrolling, but instead of just randomly wandering around, they might seek the alpha of the smallest clan. And maybe other tank clans might ignore dispersers. The inspiration for this one is that real wolves do something like this. There are actually disperser wolves or lone wolves. And the rationale in the context of this game is it would balance the clan sizes. And balanced clan sizes might result in more drama, which is more interesting. Some criteria for when clans might get balanced is maybe like the biggest clan could shrink by one tank and still be the biggest clan or tie for first. And the smallest clan could grow by one and still be the smallest clan or tie for last. By the way, the game has a satellite view, and that's also true in the original Battlezone game. And in my game, it's a top-down view. It's not really explained, but perhaps the backstory for this could be raptors. My inspiration for this is that wolves and ravens in the real world have a special relationship. Ravens alert wolves to potential prey, and ravens get to feast off of the leftovers, so both sides benefit. Maybe raptors could visit the most interesting event on the planet, such as a friend being attacked or a cub being born. And then, the satellite view would be a little bit more interesting than just looking at yourself from a top-down view. It's also possible that raptors could steal cubs. Even though cubs could be impervious to attacks by other tanks, they could be vulnerable to attacks by raptors. This would further encourage leaving behind a babysitter near eggs. The benefits of this would include it might reinforce the babysitter and territory concepts. This assumes that the concept makes the game more interesting, which we'll see. It might increase drama. The drawbacks include that it would be yet more complexity for the player to comprehend. There's this idea that now raptors can steal your cubs, which is weird. It also mixes the idea of raptor as partner with raptor as enemy. In the real world, ravens do not steal cubs, but other raptors like eagles or hawks do. So maybe if this raptor as cub stealer thing turns out to be important or useful in the game, then maybe the game could discriminate between raven partners and raptor threats. I don't know. It sounds a bit far-fetched, but I'll explore it if it comes up. Anyway, that's my checkpoint for the end of May in 2021. As usual, I don't really know who the audience is for these videos, or what they're looking for, or what they find interesting, or if they want something specific or something generic, if they want a tutorial or just like a progress update. So I'm really looking for a lot of feedback here in terms of what I should do next. So meanwhile, here are some links to some related videos and other stuff that I'm working on. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did or if you didn't, please leave me some feedback and I'll respond to it. And I'll try to make these things better in the future. Thanks a lot.